Hello everyone, welcome to your top human rights organization review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Today we're going to cover several of the top human rights organizations, but we're going to cover 5 different topics. Today we're going to start with Human Rights Watch as they look at France's end to their Burkini ban, moving over to the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, as they speak up a day before the International Day of the Disappeared. And then next we'll look at Amnesty International, and they see what awaits Syrian children in Europe after escaping war. Then we'll stay with Amnesty International, and we'll look at Kofi Annan as he is to lead a commission on Rahkine State in Myanmar. And then we will end the show back with Human Rights Watch, and we look at new information of secret detentions in the Ukraine. Now, you have probably noticed some articles circulating the internet and social media of France's Burkini ban. Well, Muslim women wear burkinis in order to keep their bodies covered, but still enjoy the sun and water at the beach like everyone else. Now, due to recent terror attacks in France and in Europe, we have seen a spike in Islamophobia. This resulted in burkini bans on French beaches. Well, for days, articles and pictures of law enforcement officials forcing women to remove their burkinis in front of them at the beach have been spreading across the internet. Now, France thought this to be necessary, while the rest of the world is calling this ban shameful. Bénédicte Jeanreau, France Director of Human Rights Watch, tells us that for now, the highest administrative court called time on the ban. The ban did not specifically ban burkinis, but prohibited wearing religious clothing on the beach. The ban was originally adopted by Villeneuve-Loubet, a small town on the French Riviera. Now, the court flatly rejected Villeneuve-Loubet authorities' arguments, finding there was no evidence that conduct adopted by some people had created any public order risk. Public sentiment or fears arising from terrorist attacks, including the one committed in Nice on July 14th, are not sufficient to justify the ban. They also refused to accept that the bans could not be upheld on hygiene or decency grounds. Now, they concluded that the judgment or that the impugned order has led to serious and blatantly illegal infringements on fundamental freedoms of movement, freedom of belief, and personal liberty. Now, the court's ruling is straightforward. Simply looking at the discrimination and the human rights principles of the case, any being with a sense of morals could see that this ban was wrong in so many ways. Now, Jeanreau ends the article saying that she hopes that this is the first step to permanently ending the ban of burkinis from French beaches. She also hopes this brings pause to people who are so easily to stigmatize and stereotype a religious group in France. Now, moving on to the ICRC. President Peter Maurer, he called out governments a day before the International Day of the Disappeared, urging them to address the human rights issue of missing people. Now, Maurer, the president of the ICRC, he especially wants to draw attention to those who have disappeared during armed conflict or other situations of violence, natural disasters, or migration. Mr. Maurer says that this needed to provide families left behind with answers and support. To help spread support, we will make this our hashtag for today and tomorrow during the International Day of the Disappeared, hashtag International Disappeared Day. Now, this is a tragedy affecting millions, but it remains vastly unacknowledged and underreported. Sufficient indifference is extremely disturbing, Mr. Maurer said. Disappearances are often a sensitive social and political issue, but that is no excuse for inaction. Now, governments must generate the political will to provide answers. Steps must be taken to prevent disappearances and to collect all the information available when people do disappear. Now, because at some point, this information might help bring answers to families and other loved ones. Now, the exact number of missing persons in the world is unknown, but the ICRC estimates that it is in the hundreds of thousands. This includes missing militants from combat, children separated from their families when fleeing or being forced to join armed militant groups, and detainees unable to contact their family members. Now, the ICRC is calling on governments to step up their response, to develop suitable legal frameworks, and the necessary systems and procedures to account for people reported missing and to provide effective support for their families. Those with influence and in position to help should take the opportunity of the International Day of the Disappeared to recommit themselves to this issue, Mr. Maurer said. Now, to remain in the dark, not knowing what has happened to someone you love, imagine the pain this must cause. For the sake of humanity, more has to be done. Now, the Syrian refugee crisis has a number of missing persons and disappearance cases as well. Amnesty International asked the serious question, what awaits Syrian children in Europe? Well, after escaping the horrors of war, Syrian children were left abandoned, separated from family, no opportunity of education, lack of basic health care, and left wondering what's going to happen next. This desperate situation is being played out across Europe, in Hungary, Serbia, Greece, and elsewhere. Now, almost a third of refugees and migrants crossing the Mediterranean to Europe are children, many of them traveling alone, vulnerable to exploitation, or separated from their families along the way, sometimes by the authorities themselves. Now, for the ones who have experienced the trauma of war, there is barely any psychosocial support. There are few safe places for them to play, let alone learn or go to school. Now, some of the children Amnesty International met have spent so long out of school, they have forgotten to read and write. One 16-year-old boy from Syria who has been in the camp on the Greek mainland told Amnesty International, "We have been here for 423 days with no hope, no education, no schools. I need the chance to complete my studies." Now, these children need safety, special care, education, and a roof over their head. They need governments to allow and facilitate family reunification. They need countries to follow through on their promises to relocate and resettle families. In Europe, governments are shamefully behind on what they promised on both fronts. For example, the European Union, the leaders have only relocated 5% of the refugees they promised to take in last June. Now, the image of these refugees and suffering children have moved the world, but not leaders. Until they act, thousands of children will continue to suffer. Now, we're going to stay with Amnesty International. We have some updates from Myanmar. Now, if you remember, one of the first videos that we posted was of Myanmar and calling attention to the Rakhine State. Rakhine State on the western coast of Myanmar is home to many minority groups who have faced decades of human rights violations and abuses, more specifically the Rohingya minority. Now, a high-level commission headed by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan is one of the first steps to address the human rights situation. Now, Rahkine Jamin, Amnesty International's director for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, was quoted saying, "The Commission should investigate decades of discrimination against minorities in Rakhine State, ensure accountability, recommend reparations, and lead efforts at reconciliation." Now, the commission heading these efforts is referred to as the Advisory Commission on Rakhine State, and they appear to be the most credible and independent attempt yet to address the long-standing human rights violations. Now, the commission is composed of 3 international members and 6 from Myanmar, including representatives from the Buddhist and Muslim communities. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and Myanmar's State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi will be steering the efforts. Now, the inclusion of international members should highlight how the situation goes beyond Myanmar's borders, but the commission would have benefited from the presence of Myanmar's other ethnic and religious minorities, such as the Rohingya, said Rahkine Jamin. Now, the Rohingya, who predominantly live in Rakhine State, have faced decades of institutionalized discrimination and denial of basic rights. The state's other minorities also face discrimination, including ethnic Rakhine, common Muslims, and Christian and Hindu communities. Now, for the commission to be truly effective, it must ensure an independent, impartial, and thorough investigation of human rights violations in Rakhine State. Only when the facts have been established can Myanmar move towards accountability and dismantling the systematic discrimination that Rohingyas face, said Rahkine Jamin. However, a commission isn't needed to take immediate steps to restore rights and dignity to the Rohingya community and other Muslims in Rakhine State. Now, a first step would be to lift the restrictions on their freedom of movement and allow them the chance to seek education, employment, and aid and assistance. Now, ending the show, we're going to go back to the Human Rights Watch group. They have some new research and information that reveals secret detention centers in Ukraine. New information has corroborated allegations of enforced disappearances and secret detention by Ukraine's security services. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International said in a joint letter to Ukraine's military prosecutor. The new information indicates that at least 5 victims of enforced disappearances remain in secret detention at Ukraine's security service in Kharkiv. This is also the secret security service is also known as the SBU. Now, one of the secret detention sites the groups documented was in the joint report issued in July 21st, 2016. The report, You Don't Exist, documented prolonged arbitrary and sometimes secret detention as well as ill treatment of detainees by both Ukrainian authorities and Russian-backed separatists. Ukraine's military prosecutor should prioritize and personally oversee an investigation into grave allegations of secret detention by the SBU. Now, in the 2 weeks after the report's publication, 13 people, 12 men and 1 woman, were released from the secret detention in the Kharkiv SBU. Now, I don't think that's a coincidence. They issue this report, and then all of a sudden, these people get released. Who knows? Maybe it is a coincidence. Now, the release of these 13 people secretly held in Kharkiv was very good news, but there has been no official acknowledgement of other detention or release or of the problem of enforced disappearances by the SBU, said Tanya Rahkine, a senior Europe and Central Asia researcher for Human Rights Watch. Now, the security services continued denial of enforced disappearances and fosters a climate of lawlessness and perpetuates impunity for grave human rights violations. In July, Ukraine's military prosecutor met with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch to discuss the joint report's key concerns, including several cases of enforced disappearances and secret detention at the Kharkiv SBU. Now, the security service denied the allegations. The military prosecutor pledged to investigate, and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch subsequently sent him a list of 16 people who, based on information from a range of sources, were being held in secret detention on the premises of the SBU in Kharkiv. Now, based on the follow-up research by Amnesty International Human Rights Watch, most of the 13 people released from the Kharkiv SBU were among the 16 on the list sent to the prosecutor's office. So again, another coincidence. Not only were the people released after the report was issued, after they sent a list of people they thought were detained, 13 of those people that were released happened to be on that list. Now, under international law, an enforced disappearance occurs when agents of the state or their proxies deprive someone of their liberty and then refuse to acknowledge it or conceal the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person. This is an issue I think needs to be addressed. But like we said, these new allegations are now corroborated with this new information received by Human Rights Watch. So hopefully in the near future, we see more of these detainees, these secret detainees, released from these secret detention centers. Well, everybody, if you want more information on any of these articles, you can find the links to all of the articles below in the description. This does it for our show today, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see all of our videos, give us a like on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. But until next time, this was your Top Human Rights Organization Review, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan.